Whether you're home or away, stay connected to your team with T-Mobile, the network that covers 99% of people in America. They've been investing billions to light up their best network ever. From your backyard to a sold-out stadium, get T-Mobile's best coverage yet. Plus, with T-Mobile, you get a price lock guarantee, so they won't raise the rate of your talk, text, and data, ever. There's never been a better time to switch. Visit your local T-Mobile store today. Coverage not available in some areas. Price lock exclusions like taxes, fees, select promos, and third-party services apply. See T-Mobile.com.
Hey everyone, welcome to The Final Four is Not on the Schedule. I'm your host Eric, alongside with expert analyst Rod. Thanks for joining us on the best MSU basketball podcast featuring in-depth recruiting, game matchup, and post-game analysis. We dive deep to give you the best tools to enjoy the Spartans and impress your friends and family. Hey everybody, it's Eric alongside Rod, and we're here joined again with our friend Dom Lese. Dominic is the @BracketDom from Bracketometry.com. I have just gotten back from the Big Ten tournament. I was racing along the lakeshore, getting back from Chicago. I can say a couple things. It was actually a great game. My family were planning to leave that game early, the Purdue-Penn State game, and then Penn State made it really interesting at the end, and so we had to stick around in a game that, I mean, boy, had Andrew Funk just hit one of those threes, it was kind of surprising. He was just ice cold today and couldn't bury in the things that he'd been hitting early in the tournament. And then I got stuck for 45 minutes at two separate toll collection things. It was a nightmare. I mean, they were like broken. You have to use credit card. I don't.
Welcome to driving in Chicago.
That's all that matters.
I know. Well, and I can tell you that for all those of you who are listening from Chicago, you can close your ears for just a moment. But I love the city, except what a nightmare. The traffic, the Saturday rush hour on Saturday afternoon for some inexplicable reason. I'm very happy to leave town and return it because I just blasted right through Grand Rapids. It's gonna be like 5 minutes drive through town, and it's like about 50 minutes just to get 3 miles in Chicago. So anyway, I'm back. Thanks so much, Tom, for joining us. Although I'm sure you have bad traffic down in Austin as well.
I was literally about to say that. Yeah, I know exactly the feeling. Austin is the same way. And before that, I lived in Houston. I've always been in places with traffic.
Is it this week that's South by Southwest?
Yes.
In Austin? So especially this week.
Well, this is the right week to stay inside and do nothing but watch college basketball and not even leave.
Right. And you were telling me, I think earlier, that this is your spring break, right? So you've got like the whole week. You're not even allowed to work if you want to. You have to watch basketball.
It kind of makes me mad. I wish it wasn't my spring break and I could use personal days for this. Now I need to find somewhere to use those. This would have been the perfect time.
Well, so you're number 2 bracketologist in the country. And I guess the first questions, we had the bracket reveal today, obviously. How did you do as far as your bracket comparing? I mean, we're trying to do it in the car, so it's kind of like hard. We're like, what'd Dom say? And then we're trying to figure out what they were saying on TV. So how did you think you did with the field?
I think I did quite well. I mean, obviously, number 2, there's going to be a lot of people trying to come for that, but I still think I'm going to be right up there at the top of the rankings once everything compiles. There wasn't a single team that I missed by more than one seed line, except for the one team that I missed completely, and that was pretty much the team everyone missed completely in Rutgers.
Yeah.
I wasn't surprised that if someone I had out was out, that Nevada was the team that was in. I thought they were very deserving as well. I really thought there were like 69 deserving teams and someone was going to be out. I just thought it would be Nevada, and nope, it was Rutgers instead. But I didn't even have them in my last 4 in, so I knew they weren't completely safe, but still caught me a little bit off guard.
Speaking of Rutgers, when I saw that, obviously, it started thinking about it. I thought back to what we talked about in your first appearance with us, specifically with regard to the net. And if I remember correctly, the context that you put the committee's usage of net into was the following, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, that the net is primarily a sorting mechanism to determine quality, what are quality wins, like a quad 1, quad 2, et cetera. But beyond that, you shouldn't really take a net ranking particularly seriously. Is
Spot
that a
on.
fair?
Yeah,
Okay.
that is. Yeah, exactly.
And boy, was this Rutgers thing and last year absolute proof of that. Because last year, to refresh people's memory, Rutgers was somewhere in the 70s in the net. I think in the net era, which isn't that long, it's only replaced RPI. I don't know what it is now, 5-6 years maybe.
About that long.
Yeah. I believe they are the lowest rated net team to get into the tournament field. I think that's right. If they're not, they're right there. So they're in the 70s last year and they get in. This year, I believe they were 40 and they don't get in. So
yeah,
I think that pretty much proves your case that you can't take that number particularly seriously in terms of it meaning much for an individual team's strength, let's say, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The only difference them being in the 40s did was make the teams who beat them look better because their net was high, but it didn't make them look any better. And yeah, like I said, it's a sorting tool. And part of the reason I'm not surprised that Rutgers is out is because if you use the net to sort their wins and losses, you go down to quadrant 3, and they were 2-4 in Q3. Yeah. I mean, that's 4 bad losses and really just not enough good wins to make back up for it. The reason I partially thought they might still be in is because a lot of those Q3 losses were just borderline Q3, like Seton Hall, barely Q3, Nebraska, Temple, all of them were pretty close. So I kind of thought the committee might take that into consideration. Like, yeah, there's these Q3 losses, but they have a bunch of Q1 wins, and those are almost Q2 where they wouldn't hurt them nearly as much. But I think that kind of proves it a little bit that the gap from literally 76 where it would be a Q3 to 75 where it would be a Q2, it might actually really make a difference. I mean, when you're sorting that many teams, sometimes it's hard to give teams those considerations of, oh, well, it was this close to this quadrant or this close to this quadrant. What's really going to stand out to you is just those records in each quadrant, and 2 and 4 in Q3. Yeah, that's going to hurt you if you don't really nitpick it and see how close some of those were.
Yeah, and one of the interesting things I thought, and it wasn't Chris Reynolds, the committee chairman, but it was, I can't remember the name of the guy. Somehow this information got out there today, and I don't know whether you saw that. They were asked about Rutgers in particular, and the sense I got is that the committee took into account what Rutgers did after Mawat Mag, who had been their starting power forward, and he got hurt with a season-ending injury maybe 3 weeks or so ago, somewhere around there. And the line was, well, they don't have a significant win after that happened. So I get it. What they were saying, in essence, with that is, we have to evaluate what Rutgers is now. And what they are now is perhaps not as strong as even their overall season-long case would have us believe. That's how I interpreted it, at least. I'm not sure how it makes sense otherwise to even mention that. But I find that rationale a little strange, because it seems to me either we're taking that stuff into consideration or we're not. And so you look at some of these scenarios where, Houston's got a starter out, UCLA's got a starter out, Kansas has a starter out, Kansas's coach was out. He may be back for these first 2 games, but on and on and on. And yet I don't see those teams punished. And it's a different scenario saying, what seed are you assigning to someone versus whether a team is in or out of the field? I understand that, but did that surprise you? Assuming that I've got that right, that actually came from the committee. Did that surprise you that was a rationale that was used? Because it surprised me a little bit that they were that explicit.
It didn't surprise me completely, but it did somewhat, and I'll explain why. It surprised me because they absolutely take injuries into consideration. That is something that they factor in. If a team lost someone and they're playing worse without them, historically, teams will be punished maybe by a seed line or so. For example, Tennessee. I think Tennessee was a 3 seed based on their resume.
Right.
But losing their starting point guard, I knocked them down to a 4 in my bracket projection.
And that's
they
what
got
they did.
4.
Yeah.
But the reason I'm still surprised is just because historically, usually those injury considerations are only used kind of in the same way as the predictive metrics, kind of to adjust seeding, but not necessarily for selection. So that part
that's
my a little bit off guard because, yeah, absolutely a team that's playing worse without one of their better players, say you were going to have them at an 8 seed, maybe you have them now at a 9 or even a 10 because of that, just to kind of make the seeding more balanced. But historically, that usually doesn't actually cost a team a bid. It just costs a team some seeding. So I was a little surprised to see that actually make the difference between maybe them being in and them being out. Again, it's not something that the committee doesn't factor in. It's just usually not at the cut line as much, where I think in this case it was.
Yeah, and that's exactly how I saw it. So I'm glad to hear you say that, because it jives with my own view of this. It just seemed a very strange usage of that as an inclusion or exclusion sort of factor. But obviously, it sounds like, despite that, you're not outraged by the idea of Nevada getting that spot rather than Rutgers. It sounded like you felt that was pretty damn close to a coin flip in terms of the overall cases between the two teams, right?
For sure. I mean, I think Rutgers had the better resume. I guess really the reason I'm not outraged is just because of who they put in. Had it been anyone else, I might had they put in Oklahoma State, who actually was ahead of Rutgers. They were the first team out. Rutgers was the second team out, which kind of surprised me. Had they put in Oklahoma State, I might have been a little bit more angry about that. But again, even though I think Nevada had a worse resume than Rutgers, I think Nevada had a tournament-worthy resume. So they had to knock out someone if they were going to get in. And I'm not mad about them getting in at all. I think Nevada did deserve it. I just didn't think the committee would agree. So I'm actually not even too mad about missing that one.
Do you suspect, last thing about Rutgers, do you suspect that if Rutgers had beaten Purdue in the Big Ten tournament quarterfinal, that it would have been a difference maker for them?
I have to imagine so, especially because based on this bracket this year, it does seem like they took the conference tournaments a little bit more into consideration than previous years. Maybe still not completely, but definitely had a bit more of an. For example, one of the ones I missed that I'm still kicking myself on, Marquette getting a 2 seed over Baylor. And that's clearly based on their Big East tournament run, because going into the conference tournaments, they did not have the better resume. After the conference tournaments, I thought Marquette had a better resume, but I kept them at a 3 because they don't factor in the conference tournaments. But that and a few others definitely showed that they factored them in a bit more this year. I think they heard some of the criticism last year of, hey, how are you ignoring all of these games? Right. So based on that and how big of a win that would be, especially since that would have made them 2-0 versus Purdue, yeah, I think they would have been in for sure.
Let me, on that point, then I promise I'll turn it over to Eric. On that point, I remember us talking about the conference tournaments, and you made an interesting point, which was, if you're playing on those things, it's not a bad idea, or it's not bad for your school, your team, if you're playing early on Friday, early on Saturday, especially, because that might be the last chance you really have to make an impression before they start locking it in. And I thought that stuck with me as well. In looking at today, obviously, Purdue winning, there was no impact. They were a 1, they were going to be a 1. We know that. Penn State is a 10, right? That seemed about where they were going to land regardless of the outcome. I would assume you don't think they would have jumped to a 9 had they won it.
I'll just put it this way in response to that, and then I'll let you finish. I think if they won, they would have had a 9-seed worthy resume, but I don't think they would have changed the bracket completely for a game that was finishing 10 minutes before the bracket was coming out. So in a way, I think the fairness won through with them losing that game, because they would have been underseeded if they won it, because I still think they would have been a 10.
Yeah, and I do too. But the other game that was played at the same time also supports that idea, because everything I was seeing is that most people had Memphis, I believe, as an 8 heading into the American Championship. Memphis goes out and beats Houston, obviously playing without Marcus Sasser, but you still have Memphis on the 8 line. So you could correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't see that they got any benefit from winning that game. And then 2, Houston actually finished as the number 2 overall seed in this thing, despite losing. Whereas Purdue won their game. I guess Kansas didn't, but Purdue would be the other team maybe that would be able to make a case for, well, why weren't we bumped up a line or a spot, not a line. But I think that would you agree the American also further buttresses the point that, hey, when you're playing in the late game on Sunday afternoon, it just doesn't matter what happens unless you have one of these really rare instances where the two teams playing each other are so close that it becomes an if-then kind of scenario.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. Those late Sunday games mean nothing. They're not gonna, if it's maybe for a bid thief, then of course it's still gonna matter, because you're gonna have to adjust the bracket for that. Or like you said, for 2 teams that are virtually tied for a 2 or 3 seed, but otherwise it's not going to make a difference at all. Now, I will admit I had Memphis at a 9, but I don't think that win is what got them up to an 8. I was torn 50-50 between them and Iowa for the last 8-9 spots. And that debate ended up not meaning anything. They both got 8s anyway. So it was FAU that I was gone. They were the one down at a 9. But I if they were an 8 when the bracket came out, I think they still would have been an 8 even if they had lost. It wasn't the result of that game that made them higher than I had them by any means.
Yeah, and you just have to wonder. I mean, if there's a point, the American, I have no idea what they'll do. I mean, they're losing Houston, and who knows what happens with that league going forward. But if you're the Big Ten, and there's been talk about this for years, but I really do wonder if at some point the Big Ten looks at this, and especially if you're correct in saying that this year you detect the conference tournament results, at least to a point, having more impact than maybe they have in the past. If that were to continue, then I got to believe there's an argument for the Big Ten looking at this and saying, hey, guys, we need to adjust our schedule.
Absolutely. At the very least, put it to a Sunday morning game. I mean, because even that, them having Princeton at a 15, for example, like I thought Princeton might be a 14 just because Yale might have been a 14 and we can just swap them into the same exact spot. But the fact that they even had them lower in that morning game shows that, wow, they were even factoring in some of these Sunday morning results and shifting things because of that. So they definitely pushed back their timetable, but there's no feasible way, even with all the criticism they got last year, to push it back to the Sunday afternoon games. Those just have to have impact. So I would move it back to Saturday or Sunday morning at the latest.
And it becomes, this becomes a problem because you have so many interested parties. You have the networks involved, and they want to have games going on all day. There was a year, and I don't know if you remember, Eric, which year it was when the Big Ten moved the tournament to the week previous.
That was when it was in order to play in New York, because it was Madison Square Garden. They had to use a different week because the Big East has it usually. So they had it the week before.
Right.
Yeah.
Which year was that? Was that 19?
I don't think Michigan State won it that year.
You remember?
No, I think it was before that. It was like 17 or 18. I'm not sure.
Maybe it was 18. Maybe it was 18. Yeah. But I was outraged by that because that's the thing. You can't win with these things. If you do it then you got your teams all sitting on ice for almost 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Which is not ideal. So I guess there's no perfect scenario, but in any event, I'll turn the floor to you, Eric. I've talked enough for now.
No, and I think, obviously what the whole Sunday afternoon game comes down to is it's money and it's exposure, right? And, you have to weigh how important is that bid for you? Are you losing bids as a league? And probably the answer is you're not. You might be losing a seed line somewhere here or there, right? That's probably all that's up for grabs. So then, is that worth the massive exposure you get? Because everyone's tuning in before the bracket show. They're tuning in to at least the end of the game. There's a lot of I don't know what the term is, but it's worth a lot of clout, I suppose, to be the league that's being shown right before the selection show. And so that's definitely going to go going forward, as now that CBS has a deal with the Big Ten. So I can't imagine that's going to change anytime soon because of that exposure. I had one other question about the Rutgers thing, because it was Chris Reynolds who was talking about it, when I was listening on the radio. He was talking about the fact that injury affected things. And one of the things he said was the fact that Rutgers down the end, that he was out long enough that they had a good feel for how good that team was without him, versus like losing him a week ago and then they drop a couple games. You're like, well, maybe they just started adjusting. And so his thing was like, well, we've seen what they are without him. Well, what were they? They lost at Minnesota, right? That's like a disastrous loss. I mean, that's like the worst you could do. They had probably the best road quad one win in the country, right? When at Mackey. And then they had arguably one of the worst quad four losses as a Power Five that was hoping to get in the tournament at Minnesota. So
for sure.
But it does lend to the thought line that where they used to say, well, the last 15 games we say how are you playing, and that's how we select things. And they said they don't do that anymore. But that's he's almost tacitly admitting that that's what he did, right? Like they're just splitting hairs, like, well, we're trying to figure out what to do. And I also wonder, you had mentioned before too, do you think the fact that it's Rutgers, I mean, if that was Kentucky, let's say it's North Carolina or Michigan State or Indiana, do you think that consideration's the same, or, what happened to Rutgers?
See, that's where I think sometimes the committee bias can seep through without them even realizing it, because injuries are so subjective. I mean,
right.
It's sure. Yeah, they definitely played worse without him, but determining how much do we punish them for how worse they were without him versus with him, there's no metrics or specific guidelines on that they have to follow. So, I mean, I'm sure that they're not purposely doing it, but like I said last time, but again, if it was Kentucky in that same exact situation, I think they would still maybe lean a little bit more towards the overall body of work. Now, at the same time, they did put in a mid-major in their place, so it's not like they're it's complete major bias here at the same time.
Right.
I still agree with that a little bit.
Yeah, or this year, we had a really good example. If it had been North Carolina with Rutgers' resume,
oh yeah,
do they get the break? I think most people would suspect that they would have. You're never going to convince everybody that there's not conspiracies at work. But I do think, I actually do, if you look at it this year, I like the fact that North Carolina did not get in. Michigan, Wisconsin. I mean, none of these programs had great cases to make. And in the end, they really weren't close. So that's how it should have been, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And honestly, I like the fact that you had a mid-major in. I mean, to be honest, over a team, let's be honest, if anyone's been watching Big Ten basketball the last few weeks, who wants to watch Rutgers again? They're not a good team. They beat Michigan, but Michigan played like garbage in the Big Ten tournament. Rutgers is just not a team that was going to do anything in the NCAA tournament. You might as well just have Nevada play anyway. To be honest, I don't.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't what the committee uses, but just from a fan perspective, like Nevada played Rutgers on a neutral field. I think Nevada would beat them. I think they're a better team. I think they're a more fun team. Now, that's not what the committee uses to select, but just again, from a fan perspective, yeah, I'd much rather see Nevada in there than Rutgers. So I'm happy to be wrong.
Any other? So, I mean, obviously you talked about there were a few cases where you had a team on the wrong seed line, one direction or another, but anything in that realm that kind of surprised you, or you didn't think there was a good case for? You mentioned, I guess, Marquette being a 2 is one you were kind of kicking yourself for not revising. Anything else like that?
See, I mean, now that one didn't surprise me on any. That's probably the reason I'm kicking myself on that one, because of all the ones that I missed by one seed line, that's the one I was the most torn on when I submitted my final bracket. So of course I miss it. There were a couple others. Like I said, I didn't miss any by multiple seed lines. So none were big surprises, but a couple of, and I'm pulling up the bracket right now. Couple of the 5 seeds over the 6 seeds surprised me, for example. Like, let's see here. Yeah, St. Mary's still being a 5, despite finishing with that absolute destruction against Gonzaga. I mean, that just really shows. I know I talk about the metrics are more important for seeding and the resume is more important for selection, but that just makes me realize that's even more the case than I thought, because St. Mary's does have the metrics, but that's kind of about all they got besides that one win against Gonzaga in overtime at home earlier in the season too. And to still see them at a 5 seed, I had them at a 6. And I mean, and if it weren't for the metrics, I wouldn't even have had them there. So that maybe surprised me a little, but again, that's 1 seed line off. Miami at a 5 as well. While I'm on the 5 lines, I thought they were also going to be a 6. But again, that doesn't surprise me significantly. Just some of the teams that dropped down, Iowa State, TCU, both of them being on the 6 lines instead of a 5. I think that just surprised me because based on the committee's top 4 reveal, it seemed like they were just in love with the Big 12. Like, oh, they're all these teams and all you can get is good wins. You can't get bad losses against each other. I didn't think those teams would be really capable of falling much from that top 4 reveal. So seeing Iowa State, who was a 3 in their reveal, go all the way down to a 6, despite finishing with 2 blowouts of Baylor. I know they had a rough stretch before that, but didn't see them dropping that far. If anything, I just thought it would be the committee almost not wanting to admit they were wrong. Like, oh, we had them at a 3 and they've been all right since then. How can we drop them 3 spots from there?
Well, and TCU would be an interesting case because, again, we talk about injury having an impact, right? And it seems like, I mean, if you felt like their overall resume, even as is, warranted a 5 rather than a 6, but they get the 6. Well, clearly they didn't account much at all for the period of time where, what was it, Mike Miles was the guy who was injured. Didn't really account for it at all, apparently.
I'll say this, the reason with TCU, they must have accounted for it some with them going down to a 6. I had them at a 5. But I think the reason they didn't go down much farther than that compared to Rutgers is just they played a good bit of basketball without him this year. He was out for an extended stretch earlier in the season too, and they played all right without him. I mean, pretty similar results to how they played with him. So I think when you have that to show for, hey, it didn't affect us that much, they're not going to punish you as much.
Right.
Either,
so. My point, just sorry I wasn't clear.
Oh, yeah.
My point is, I would think if you accounted for, well, yeah, they took some losses, but there were losses without their best player, that should have cut the other way and solidified them even more on the 5 line. You know, kind of the opposite of the Rutgers thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I feel like it is kind of the case with that. I feel like the injuries, a lot of times they'll punish you a lot more for having someone out than they'll help you.
Right.
You really got to play well once he comes back to get that injury consideration. Creighton, I thought they were going to be a 6 seed because they had some losses without Kalkbrenner earlier in the year, and they were better when he came back, but they still kept them at a 7, I guess, just because they weren't blowing the doors off people once he came back. And I've seen it before where teams had some bad losses with someone out and then just came back and were world beaters. And then the committee almost acted like those losses never happened, but you almost have to do that. You almost have to show a clear distinction in who you are with them and without them to get that injury consideration boost, where on the flip side, you lose them and you just play a little worse without them, they're going to drop you down a lot quicker.
Well, I think we'll wrap it up there. Thanks so much, Bracket Dom Lese from Bracketometry.com. Check out his, subscribe to him on Twitter or follow him on Twitter at Bracket Dom. Make sure you check out his link, and I guess it would be a couple days before Bracket Matrix figures out the whole statistics and sort of where your ranking goes. They
usually do in a day or two from now.
Yeah.
So fingers crossed that I'm still up there. I mean, I think I'm going to be like in the top 10%, but it's tough when you were number 2 because I mean, I could finish it's like 15th this year, but then there's a lot more people to pass you than to pass. So
absolutely. So before you go, let's get your picks for the Final Four. So I'm gonna pull up my brackets here. So let's start with the South region, Alabama and Arizona. Who do you have coming out of that region?
Ooh, all right. I'm gonna say out of the South region, it's hard to go against Alabama.
I think so. Yeah, right.
I'm gonna say Arizona doesn't even make it to the Elite Eight against them. I'll say it's Alabama over Baylor in the Elite Eight of the South region. Yes.
And then let's go to the Midwest, which is the Houston, Texas region.
Man, this is a tough one. I don't think Houston's the favorite to win it all. If you look at the odds, I'm not as sold on them as that. But
neither am I.
I still think in this region, I'm going to take them to come out. Now, I think I probably am going to have them losing in the Final Four to the team I'll pick next. And Texas is playing awesome right now. Something tells me don't trust Texas in the tournament.
That's called history. Yeah, no, I hear you on that. Well, the concern, just real quick, to me at least, the concern I have about Houston, and this was before Sasser got hurt, is I see that team and I love them. They were so many elements of that team remind me of vintage Tom Izzo teams, the way they defend, the way they rebound, the toughness. But that offense can get ugly at times. And I just think if you can't score better than they do, it's tough to win 4 straight. So I'm with you on that. I'd be a little bit nervous about them, but anyway.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Just because with their play style, they're going to be in close games that shouldn't be close. Now they're going to be the better team in all of them, but if you let a team hang around 4 straight games, eventually someone might knock you off. So, and I think Texas could do it if they get to Houston. I just don't even trust them to get there. But if Texas makes the Elite Eight, I think they beat Houston. But I'll take you.
We'll then move down to the West region where you have number 1 Kansas versus number 2 Big Ten school UCLA. Who do you have there?
Yeah, right. Soon to be a rival of Michigan State.
Not long,
there.
That's right.
In this one, I think Kansas. I'm taking them. I think I'm taking Kansas to potentially win it all again, at least get back to the Final Four, and I think I would take them over Houston. I know they didn't look great against Texas. And like I said, Texas, I think at their best can be the best team in the country. I just don't trust them. At least Kansas, is consistent. They have that tournament experience. We'll see with Bill Self. Hopefully he's all right and back for the tournament. If he is, I think they're just going to be back to what they were before. I think you can almost blame that loss to Texas on that. I think this team might be the best team in the country again. And it's hard to pick anyone against them, especially since everyone else has such a tough path. I mean, UCLA and Gonzaga having to go through each other, UConn having to go through St. Mary's or VCU. Give me Kansas out of that region. I feel pretty good about that one. And I think maybe might even be my pick to win the whole thing.
And then finally, the East, everyone's least favorite number 1 seed, it seems to be Purdue. And then Marquette is a 2. And of course, Michigan State sitting over there lurking at the 7 seed.
This is one of the craziest regions to me because I think this might have like the worst 1, 2, 3, and 4 seed, but maybe the best 5, 6, 7, and 8 seed.
Right, yeah, Duke's
I mean, no one wants to pick Purdue. No one wants to pick Marquette. No one wants to pick Kansas State. No one wants to pick Tennessee. But then after that, you have Duke, Kentucky, Michigan State, and Memphis. I mean, those could be the 4 in the Sweet 16 right there. That's some classic blue blood action right there. So this is really the most wide open one to me for sure. I might go. This is where I might end up picking a bold one, and I'm not sure if I've decided which one I'm going to go bold with yet. I'm sure you'd love me to go Michigan State as my bold pick.
No, none of. Yeah, we want honesty.
It may dictate whether you come back or not, but go ahead and pick.
Put it this way. I do think I might take Michigan State over Marquette. But
oh, absolutely.
Yeah, but something tells me they might be playing another upset team there in the Sweet 16 that might end up going all the way to the Final Four. I got a gut feeling with this Kentucky team. I know they lost to Vanderbilt twice.
That is a bold.
I know. I don't know if I'm going to do it. Maybe I'll go with Duke instead. But I feel like this.
Now here's the thing. I just want to get this line off. I'm going to repeat it when we move on to the next thing. I looked at it and I happened to watch Oral Roberts just absolutely dominate in their conference tournament championship game. And of course, we all remember them from a couple years ago. I've seen their 7'9" center Vanover. I saw him play in AAU years ago before he was in college. And of course, he's stuck in my memory because he's 7'9". But I was inclined to think Oral Roberts has a hell of a shot to take out Duke. And then I watched ESPN's Bracketology show, and every single one of these guys picked Duke to come out of that region. So that solidifies it for me. Oral Roberts takes out Duke in the first round.
Well, put it this way. I almost wanted to take Duke myself, and then I watched that, and I was like, well, that's not really an against the grain pick anymore.
No.
Literally all of them are taking it, and I still pick a low seed here. Yeah.
And here's the other thing. This season, more than any other year, I think if you've won a bunch of games, it feels like you've really got a lot of momentum, you're on a roll, you are just accelerating toward the rug getting pulled out from underneath you. And they've won 9 games in a row now. So what are the odds that they're going to win 4 more? I don't like their odds.
Agreed. And people forget they played Purdue earlier this year as well, and that wasn't even close. Purdue wiped the floor with them. I mean, I think I'm going to have Purdue in my Elite 8. I do think I'll have Duke over Tennessee, but then I maybe just a hedge would still pick Purdue in the Final Four, like in my office pools. But I think the other side of that bracket legitimately might be Kentucky, Michigan State in the Sweet 16. And it's like, who wins that? And it's hard to say the winner of that ends up going on to win the whole region. So I don't want to be too chalky and take Michigan or take Purdue again and take pretty much all the 1 seeds at that point. But if you're filling out an office pool and you're trying to win, they might be the smart play just to hedge, because I think they make the Elite 8 there. And I think whoever comes out of the bottom half of that bracket, even though they can definitely beat Purdue, could be anyone.
Sure.
Right.
Well, thanks so much for coming on. I want to remind you and then everyone else listening and watching. And so if you have not yet subscribed to the Final Fours on the Schedule, you can go to YouTube at TFFINOTS. You can watch us here. And if you're watching, make sure you hit the subscribe and like button. But we are having a bracket contest. We'd love to invite you to be one of our celebrities to come on.
Absolutely.
So all you have to do is search on the ESPN site, because we're using that just because it's simplest. So TFFINOTS. There you can win prizes from Nudge Printing, which you could use to get some Texas State gear. How does that sound?
Absolutely.
All right. Well, Dom,
when we're going to make our first tournament next year ever.
There you go. It's only a matter of time, right? And then we'll notice it.
Duke is due to lose. We're due to make one eventually, right?
Right. We'll know if things are kind of funny if you have them as your last 4 in all next year or something like that. So, again, thanks a lot, Dom Lese from Bracketometry at BracketDom. We appreciate it so much for coming on the show.
Absolutely. It's a blast as always. Thank you guys for having me.
See you next year. Bye.
Thanks a lot.
The midway point of the NBA season is here, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scorers and threes drained. I love mixing it up by betting against the spread, taking the over on Giannis's points every chance I get, and more exclusive bets like the 2x3, 2 threes scored in the first 3 minutes. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine bets like those for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/Blue Wire. That's FanDuel.com/Blue Wire to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. 21 plus in select states. First online real money wager only. Bonus issued as non-withdrawable free bets that expires in 14 days. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit fanduel.com/RG in New Jersey.
March Madness is here, and the best way to stay up to date on everything happening in the NCAA tournament is the Field of 68 After Dark. Join Rob Doster, Jeff Goodman, John Fanta, Tyler Hansbrough, and the rest of the Field of 68 crew as they break down brackets, upsets, and your favorite Cinderellas throughout the month of March. You can listen on SiriusXM Channel 84. You can stream it on the Field of 68 YouTube channel, or you can just search Field of 68 After Dark wherever you are listening to this Blue Wire podcast.
All right, welcome back. Thanks again so much to Dominic Lese for joining us from Bracketology.com. I'd like to remind you that if you've not had the opportunity, you can still support our show. There are many ways you can do that. One is you can go to our support page. You can go to the Final Four is on the schedule.com/support. There you can give one-time gifts via PayPal or Venmo. Or also a monthly recurring basis through Patreon. That's the way we support the show. We get all these extra features like having a guy like Dom on. You have helped us become one of the top 50 basketball podcasts of all basketball podcasts. That includes professional and college in the country. So thank you so much for that, for sharing the show with your friends, for subscribing, making sure you get the word out there about our show. So keep doing that. Help the show grow more and more Spartan fans can find our show. We really appreciate that. And that also includes going to whatever podcast player you're listening to and leaving a written review. You can do that, obviously, whatever podcast player you're on. Take a picture of it. You can email it to me, eric@tffinots.com. And there you can get a $5 gift card to Nudge Printing. I'll just send it out to you. So we appreciate that support as well. I'm sure you don't know what's so special about today, Rod, besides the fact that it was the selection show.
I don't.
But 1 year ago today, I got home from the Big Ten tournament in Indianapolis, and I had an email from you asking me, hey, would you be interested in helping out the show? I said,
because I was in an absolute panic because it was selection Sunday, and I was informed that my previous partner, who did great work, by the way, could no longer continue. And so it's kind of like, I don't know if you're Santa Claus and Christmas Eve, you get the news that the sleigh is out of commission. I mean, it really
Rudolph,
felt that
it's
way.
foggy. We need help.
It really felt that way. Thanks again, obviously, to you coming on and helping me salvage the tournament period and then everything that's come since then.
Yeah, well, it has been an absolute pleasure. It's been great getting to know you and getting to know all the fans and the nice, kind notes they send to us all the time. And the show's grown quite a bit too since last year as well. So that's been really great. It's been kind of fun to build this sort of brand, and we've had a bunch of new features and stuff, which thank you so much to everyone for listening and again sharing. You guys are the reason this show is doing so well, and so I really appreciate that. And it has been a lot of fun, but it is a ton of work, and so I think what support we get probably doesn't offset the extra work involved, but it's a ton of fun, and so it's been just a blast. And my wife's always like, man, you just kind of know more about the things than you used to. I said, yeah, I was pretty dumb before I started listening to you all the time. So anyway, let's do our bracket show, and let's go through the regions. I guess we'll start, I suppose, in the top with the South. So the South is the number 1 seed is Alabama, and has the 2 seed is Arizona. Notable Big Ten schools are just Maryland, and they are the 8 seed. They're playing West Virginia as the 9. So what sort of sticks out to you about this region, and so what are your thoughts on it?
Well, obviously Alabama is the popular choice, and that's not a surprise. They're the overall number 1 seed in the field. I would just say if this Alabama team is the number one overall seed in the tournament, it's a down year. And I say that not because I think they're horrible. They're not, clearly. But here's what worries me about Alabama. If I were an Alabama fan,
both of them,
my complaint, God help me. But my complaint about Nate Oates' approach to basketball is this. For those who don't know, and I think a lot of our listeners probably do, but for those who don't know, Nate Oates is certainly among high major coaches, I think, the most analytically driven coach in the sport. And so that has some consequences in terms of how Alabama plays. On offense, they are essentially, it's layups and dunks or threes. They don't want to ever take mid-range shots. I mean, never. And the reason for that is shots at the rim or three-pointers are the most valuable shots you can take in an analytical sense. That's math. It's simple math. Yeah. You can't argue with it. Defensively, they play a lot of drop coverage, and they also will extend on the three-point line. So what does that leave a team playing them? What kind of shots are there for them to take? A lot of mid-range shots, okay, which analytically are the least valuable shots, the 2-point jumper, so to speak.
Right.
Again, can't argue with the math. Over the course of 30-some games, I can't argue with the premise being sound. It is. Mm-hmm. My issue is this. In the NCAA tournament, where you were trying to win at least 4 straight to get to a Final Four, and you're trying to win 6 straight to win a national championship, either way you want to slice it, having that kind of rigidity in terms of how your team plays, I think is a major problem. It is a flaw because you are not in an NBA style best of 7 kind of scenario. If you were, can't argue with it. It's the soundest way to play. And then if you get beat, it's just because your talent level to execute that scheme wasn't quite good enough. What I'm saying is your talent can be great to execute your scheme in the NCAA tournament, and you can still get beat because you don't adjust. Mm-hmm. We talk about this all the time. There were several games this year where we came into it knowing, hey, Michigan State's going to have to hit long twos because this team they're playing is going to shack ball screens. Shots are going to be there for a guard in the mid-range. They got to hit them. The problem with Alabama, as I see it, is I don't think they'll adjust. And trying to win 4 straight when you're playing the caliber of opponents you face in the NCAA tournament, I just think when you're giving stuff away, because they do give you stuff. They give you the mid-range shot. Offensively, they won't take the mid-range shot. So if you can do what they try to do to teams and take away their threes and also contest them at the rim, well, the logical approach would be, well, I guess we got to hit some long twos to try to at least loosen this up. But Alabama won't change, not from what I've seen. And so that's what makes me very, very suspicious of their Final Four credentials. They've got great talent. I mean, we saw them firsthand, right, in November. Mm-hmm. A lot of size, and it's athletic size. Solid guard play. They got a number of guys that get good depth. And then you add in on top of all that, the best freshman in the country this year in Miller. So I understand why people are picking them, but that's the reason I'm not picking them. I can't. I just can't, because I think somewhere along the way in these 4 games, someone is going to exploit their system against them. And it will be frustrating because Nate Oates will look at it and say, hey, we gave up low percentage shots, and we didn't take any low percentage shots, and we still got beat. Welcome to NCAA tournament basketball, where you can't have scenarios like that. You've got to be able to play in a flexible fashion. I say this all the time. It's one of the big reasons Tom Izzo's been to as many Final Fours as he has, is because his teams have long demonstrated the ability to play a variety of different styles and games within the same tournament run. And I think that's a trait that most of the teams that get to a Final Four tend to possess. Not always, but most of the time. So that's my take on Alabama.
That makes a lot of sense. And, when you, it's definitely matchup dependent. Obviously, it's always matchup dependent in the NCAA tournament. You get the team that is their strength, maybe taking those sort of shots. But it makes you look at a team like Purdue.
Or they just have a great day. They just have a great day.
And you have a bad day shooting.
Look at Michigan State. Go back to the COVID year. Michigan State hosts Michigan at Breslin, and Michigan State is on life support. They got to win these games, right? And I remember doing the preview to that game saying, well, it's not ideal, but Rocket Watts is going to have to hit a bunch of long twos because Michigan is just going to play Dickinson and drop coverage. And that was a good defensive team that Michigan had that year.
Yeah, those livers and
those are the shots you're going to get. You have to hit them. What did he do? He went out and hit them. That wouldn't have been a solid bet if you were looking at the course of the whole season. But on that day, that was what was available. Those are the shots he took, and he made them. I just think when you're playing teams at this level where nobody's, past the first game, let's say, everybody's at least decent.
Oh yeah. It's a
risk.
You're susceptible to getting beat. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say if you look at Purdue traditionally has, at least last however long I can remember now, like 6, 7, 8 years now, they have the big guy in the middle, right? Like either Edey or Isaac Haas or whomever. And there's that's their one way they play. They got the big plotting guy in the middle and they do the drop. And that they sort of, it's your point, they fall away at some point in the tournament because they get the team where they're, or they're not hitting their threes or whatever. And there's sort of no way for them to find another way to sort of generate offense or compete.
If you think about teams that have gotten to the highest level in recent years. So you think about, last year's Kansas team or the year before where we had Gonzaga and Baylor. Those teams could win a lot of different kinds of games, and they didn't have obvious things that they were giving an opponent or obvious things that they wouldn't take offensively. I get the math. I get it.
Yeah.
And over the course of a full season, that's probably, as long as your talent level is good, and Alabama's is, that's going to probably produce really good results as it has for them this year. But man, in a one and done environment, I really don't like it. I guess we should talk about the rest of that bracket though. And
right. I guess you'd say the next round, it's Maryland. I don't like Maryland in general, and I don't even know if they make it to that second round. It doesn't matter who they're playing.
The one thing about that Maryland-West Virginia match, and I've seen a few people talk about this already, and it's true. You don't have to love either of those teams. I don't, but they're both Maryland I can speak to with more authority because I've seen them a lot more, but West Virginia too. They're both physically tough teams. That they're going to go into a game with Alabama and they're going to compete from a physicality point of view. Maryland's a good example of what I'm talking about, though. When I think about this Maryland team, I don't think about a great shooting team because they're not.
No.
But on a given day, could I imagine
right.
Jameer Young hitting 6 or 7 long twos and Dante Scott just sticking it from the mid-range all day long, over 40 minutes? Yeah, absolutely I could. I don't know at what point I believe Alabama goes out, but I don't think they're getting out of the region. One interesting game might be that 4-5, assuming Virginia and San Diego State get through. Those are two teams that, oh my God,
Would it be 30-20?
Yeah, great defensive teams. But, and then the other side, you've got Creighton and Baylor as the high seeds who might meet in a second round game. It's the polar opposite. Great offensive teams can't guard anybody. Missouri, honestly, if I'm picking a team to come out of this region, I think I'm going with Arizona.
Yeah.
I don't love them defensively, but I think they're good enough. And, that's a team, if you were talking about an Elite Eight versus Alabama, let's say Alabama gets that far, Arizona's a team that can compete with Alabama in terms of their size, in a lot of ways, in terms of their athleticism. They might not be quite as athletic down low, but they're big enough to where I don't think it would matter very much. So I'm going to go with Arizona to come through. But honestly, we talk about this stuff, and every one of these damn shows that I'm watching dealing with the brackets, everybody's going chalk with the one exception, Duke out of the East. This is not a year to go chalk, in my opinion.
You wouldn't think so. I mean, if the Big Ten tournament taught us anything, although I guess one won it, but.
Well, yeah, but 10, which by the way, I don't know if we talked about it here. I did talk about it on a Wisconsin podcast. That
right. You predicted Purdue, Penn State.
I got the final
finals,
right. And I got the right winner, barely. So
barely,
I'll take my bows on that as opposed to the Big Ten regular season.
We'll shower you with praise.
Yeah. But that's, I mean, how can you say, now I get it. The hard part is when everybody is flawed, then it becomes really difficult to say, well, this is the 5 seed that I think can make a run, because everybody's flawed. And so that's why I think you're going to see more chalk predicted this year than normal, despite the fact that that's counterintuitive if you believe, as I do, that everybody's flawed.
It's very similar to, I think, the Big Ten tournament, because I think you said you could just look at it and say, well, I mean, if you had to pick someone, you're going to pick Purdue. But if you said Purdue versus Field, you'd say, I'll take the Field. And so this may be one of those regions where you said, well, if you're going to pick someone, you'd probably pick Alabama. But maybe if you want to say, well, who's got a better chance? Probably the Field over Alabama. Now, that may always be the case because the ones don't make it, to the Final Four, where they like 50% of the time or something like that, or a little under 50%. But I agree. I think Arizona I think we'll still go with Alabama just because it's the team I least want to make it through, and that seems to be the team that always makes. This is why I always lose these brackets. But I think they'll go through, and the only other thing of note here that this bracket, that a team I find interesting, is just West Virginia has Joe Toussaint, who my wife hated when he was at Iowa. Yeah. So she'll be looking for Maryland to knock him out as well. So let's move on over to the Midwest region.
Okay.
Where you have Houston as a 1 seed. And this is also can be called the Indiana/Iowa region, where there are 5 teams from Iowa and Indiana. The entire states, all their teams are in this region. You have Iowa as the 8. You've got Drake as the 12. They're in Des Moines. You have Indiana as the 4. Iowa State as the 6. And Xavier as the 3.
Well, Xavier's Ohio.
Yeah. They're Cincinnati. So I guess there's only 1 team from Indiana. So I guess just
4 teams Indiana, still. Or it's just the Iowa region.
Just the Iowa region, right. And actually... so, and then of course the 2 seed is Texas, who Dom seemed to like, sort of as much as you can like anyone in this bracket.
He's not
3 is Xavier.
He's not wrong about that. I mean, Texas's history would lead you to conclude that you should be very suspicious, because they had years under Rick Barnes where they were seated in similar position, and he only made it through once, ironically beating Michigan State in an Elite Eight game. What was that, 2002 or 2003, with TJ Ford. But historically, Texas is a disappointment here. The other thing about Texas, which is worth mentioning, a lot of people really, really like Colgate as a 15. And part of the reason is Colgate is the best 3-point shooting team in America. So that is a good reason to say, well, that's one you should think about, because
it would be fun watching them play Penn State if that somehow happened.
that would be such a great, or that would be that would be a second round game maybe. Well, let's start in the top half.
Yeah. So
I like
Houston, we assume beats Northern Kentucky, and then you got Iowa, Auburn.
Yeah, that's going to be a real contrast. Iowa, obviously, a team that when they're on shooting wise, and given that these are neutral court games, who knows? Although theoretically neutral, I mean Auburn is playing in Birmingham, which is a hell of an advantage for a 9 seed. I mean, it really is.
Sure.
That's something the committee is maybe not getting enough criticism about. But Iowa, a team that can be great offensively against all, but can't guard anybody, versus Auburn, a team that guards very well but can't score. So we'll see
they'll score against Iowa,
the movable object or the resistible force, which one wins out. But I'm going to go Iowa there only because Iowa laid a big fat egg in the Big Ten tournament and also lost their last regular season game against Nebraska. So they're on a 2-game losing streak, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're due for a win. Let's go with Iowa.
Right.
Honestly, that kind of rationale is going to guide a lot of how I see this because
it's funny because
believe it.
Oh, I think you're right. And I'd probably pick Iowa here as well. It is funny how they have these regions set, and I understand the regions because they base it on where the finals are. But you think the venues would also be in areas that are, the pods would be places that are in the Midwest. And so it's strange that, unless what your definition of the Midwest is, Birmingham is far from it. It's good for Houston, I suppose. That's the reason. But
that left the building a long time ago.
Yeah.
They will, the 1 seeds get to choose in order, I believe, where they want to be. So for example, both Alabama and Houston are actually playing in Birmingham, if you look at it.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Makes sense. I understand Alabama for sure.
Kansas is in Des Moines. Purdue is in Columbus. So they all got advantageous placement, but that's a change that they made. It used to be that the Midwest region was actual venues in the Midwest, but that's long since left the building. Then we have, I guess, the other matchup you're up for, Miami of Florida against Drake.
Yeah. So this one, I've watched a lot of Drake games. I bet you haven't watched any.
I have seen Drake play once. But here's the thing. The Missouri Valley, to me, and granted, it's not the same league it once was because it's lost, Creighton, it's lost Wichita State, some important members, Tulsa in recent years.
Louisville.
But it's still a good league.
Yeah.
And it's still a league that when I look at it, I think anybody who comes through that league is dangerous. And Miami, I'm just anybody can talk whatever Big Ten trash they want. I am really, really not sold on the ACC.
Yeah.
I just think the ACC was flat out awful this year. So I'm not convinced by Miami. And I think that's a good, and it's a 5-12, which is, always that's the upset special, right? Where's the 12?
I think it's almost 50%. Yeah, I think it's like 60% win percentage for 5s, which is not that great considering.
It's a better winning percentage than 10s have over 7s, for example. Which is counterintuitive. But I think Drake's got a real shot there just because I don't know. And Miami's dealing with an injury. I don't know if it's likely to extend to that game, but they weren't full strength in the ACC tournament. And then you got Indiana against Kent State. And, once upon a time, the MAC wasn't very different than what I just said about the Missouri Valley.
I agree. Yeah, they used to be much better. Yeah.
Yeah. It used to be, you had to really worry about what might come out of a MAC team if you were playing them in a first round game. Kent State's a good team. I've seen them play. And I'm not, where I'm at with Indiana and their guards.
Yep.
But the MAC isn't what the MAC once was. So I think the Big Ten gets it done there. And then if you go through the rest of that half of the bracket, I don't love Houston for the reasons that I said to Dom. I just, even with Marcus Sasser, and who knows if he's going to be back, but even with him, offensively, they just get stuck in the mud too much for my taste. Could they slug it out to a Final Four just based on defense, rebounding, and toughness? Yes, they could. But I don't love that. Again, because I think Houston's got to win ugly. And I don't love it when you only can win one way, really. And that's kind of where I feel they are. But I'm going to figure at, because nobody's all that overwhelming. And the only team on that side of the bracket that I think might have enough to really push Houston, I'm going chalk here, it would probably be Indiana on their best day. If Indiana was really playing high-level basketball, Hood Schifino is playing well, they'd have a shot. The bottom half, Iowa State's great defensively. They struggle on offense, but they've probably got enough to take out either Mississippi State or Pitt. Xavier is an interesting team. Great guards, really, really great guards. They might be a good choice here. They're a 3, so they're hardly a sleeper, but I do like them probably to get to the Sweet 16. And then I think Penn State and Texas A&M is going to be fascinating. I've actually seen a decent amount of Texas A&M this year. And the only thing that's got me hesitating on Penn State is they're on a heater. I mean, I know they lost today, but they almost might as well have won.
Yep. And
they won 3 games before that, and then they won their last regular season game. So my intuition is a bad one's coming. But I love watching that team play. I want to believe they could sneak one out against A&M. I don't feel great about it because of the trend. What's interesting, and also I did not hear a lot of people talking about, but God, I don't know why not. The committee has set it up so that in Des Moines in a second round game, you've got Texas A&M against Texas potentially. That would be imagine Michigan and Michigan State facing off, except you have to add in that they don't play regularly anymore. They will start to when Texas joins the SEC, but for several years they haven't been playing. So,
and these are 3 Texas teams in the same region that are trying to get to Houston, right? I mean, you've got Houston, Texas, and Texas A&M. Right. Only one of them can get there at most.
This is just such a tough deal this year. I'm going to stick to one of my old axioms, say guard play wins in March, and I'm going to pick Xavier to pop their cherry and get to their first Final Four in program history. I'm going to pick Xavier to come through. Sean Miller, the triumphant return, free of scandal, but still sweating to the oldies under his armpits. And I think Xavier comes through based on their guards.
And I'm going to say I'm absolutely going to take Drake over Miami. So just briefly about Drake, they have been playing extremely well the last. I think they'd won 9 in a row and they'll drop their last game of the season at Bradley. By 10.
Good.
And then they just ran roughshod in the Missouri Valley tournament. It's their 3rd straight Missouri Valley tournament championship game actually too. And they beat Bradley by like almost 30 points. They just obliterated a really good Bradley team. They have everything. They play pretty decent defense. They've got all kinds of glue guys. They've got guys who can shoot from outside. They can score in the post. They've got a Tucker DeVries, who's a guy who probably, without a doubt, he'd start in any Big Ten team tomorrow. He's that good. He's like 6'6", I think, or 6'7", and he can shoot from anywhere. They have the ability to beat Miami, and I could easily see them beating Indiana as well, or Kent State, whichever team. I think I'm going to have them in the Sweet 16. I don't think they probably have enough to get through Houston, but I'm probably with you with Xavier. I kind of think that's probably the team I'd pick as well to get through. But the only interesting thing from my part is the Drake, and it is a bit of a homer pick because I watch tons of Drake basketball, but they are actually a really good team, and they've been fun to watch. And they're almost all seniors. I think they're older than 6 NBA teams, if I remember the stat we showed during the
so
definitely older.
They have a lot of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, they've got a guy who's 25, just like Robracha. You know, they got their point guard is 25 years old, and he's really good, Roman Penn. So, which I can't imagine being in college still when you're 25, but
No.
whatever.
No.
I guess I sort of was in med school, but that's a little bit different. So before we go on to the next two regions, I just want to remind you that if you have issues with your water on your roof, check out your gutters, make sure they're operating properly. If not, contact Kurt Stauffer and his team over at Brothers that Just Do Gutters. Their name says exactly what they do. They just do gutters. They specialize in gutters and making sure that it functions properly. If you have gutters that are plugged up with stuff, you need all kinds of leaf problems, as we do in Michigan, they can clean out your gutters. They can repair them. They can replace them. They've got a huge selection of things. They put leaf guards on. I had all kinds of problems with my gutters. Kurt and his team took care of them. They're available in a large region over in the Grand Rapids area, from all the way out to the Lakeshore, down to Saugatuck, up to Rockford, out to Lowell. If you're anywhere in that area, get a hold of Kurt and his team. They'll give you 10% off if you mention Final Four on your email at kurt.stauffer@brothersgutters.com. Again, the link to that will be available in the show notes. So moving on to the West region, you have Kansas as the 1. You've got Illinois lurking as 9. You have Northwestern as the 7, and UCLA as the 2. And then Gonzaga is the 3, which is probably of the notable teams that, and I guess UConn at 4. So go to start at the top with the Kansas part, the first
and TCU as a 6.
Right. Yeah.
Look, Kansas, good team, obviously. Great team, no. What they were last year, no. I don't believe that. I don't see Kansas coming through. It could be as early as that second round game. Now, we all.
You mean Arkansas, right?
Well, I was going to say we all have our issues.
Underwood intentionally threw the Big Ten tournament so he could rest his team for the NCAA tournament. We know that's his strategy.
He also he made a great comment today after the bids were announced that, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners have already seen this, but you may not have. That
I have not, for sure.
Okay. That he was trumpeting how it's a great thing that both Illinois and Iowa are the only teams in the Big Ten that have 3-year streaks running of being included in the initial 64. In other words, that they didn't have to play in the first 4, which is an interesting way of getting around the fact that Tom Izzo has been at 25 straight NCAA tournaments and is being celebrated. You know, John Calipari put out a great, John Calipari is doing everything he can to make me embrace him. I mean, that was
gotta love
pure,
Kentucky.
That was pure class. And
boy, those plucky upstarts in Kentucky.
Well, and the responses were great because it was vintage Kentucky fan base. It was 90% Kentucky fans screaming at her about, we don't care. Why don't you coach your damn team? Great people, great fan base. But anyway, Brad Underwood's a weird guy. And I've been saying, I feel, and again, I don't want to pat myself on the back, but I feel like I was ahead of the curve on this because I saw this happening like 3 years ago. And it wasn't getting talked about a lot, but I think now a lot of people are starting to notice it, that at any given moment, if Brad Underwood can cut one of two ways, say the right thing or say the wrong thing, he's usually going to choose the wrong thing. And this was another very mild example, but if you don't think that was noticed, certainly by the Michigan State fan base, you're out of your mind. So I don't want Illinois to have any success, not till this guy leaves. But I have to admit, either Illinois, and I don't love Eric Musselman either, so that's kind of but obviously Brad, to use Middle Eastern terrorist vernacular, Illinois is the close enemy. Arkansas would be a far enemy. But are either one of those teams capable of taking Kansas out in a second round game? Absolutely they are. Absolutely. I mean, Illinois has been a horrendous shooting team, like jump shooting team, just awful. But is there a world in which in a second round game against Kansas, Matthew Meyer goes 5 for 7 and Terrence Shannon goes 4 for 6 from 3? Yeah, Absolutely there is. Illinois has talent. That's not the issue. It's cohesiveness. It's everybody rowing in the same direction. All that stuff's been the problem. So if I were Kansas, I wouldn't be thrilled about that draw because either of those teams are dangerous enough that they could take you out. You drop below that, St. Mary's, Dom had it right, man. That game against Gonzaga just really, I think, soured a lot of people on them, which probably means they're going to go on a run. But I don't like them. And they've never, honestly, for as much fun as they are in the regular season, because they're the only foil Gonzaga consistently has in that league.
Right.
And they beat Gonzaga just enough to keep it interesting, as they did this year. But they haven't had very much tournament success. I mean, St. Mary's has yet to have one of those, multi-game runs that really get your attention. So it's hard.
Have they even made the Sweet 16? I don't think they have.
I don't know that they have. If they have, I don't remember it. And VCU, I got Shaka hanging over with that, even though it's long since removed from those days. But it's hard to get excited about either of those teams. The UConn-Iona matchup is sneakily interesting because that's, of course, Rick Pitino coaching Iona. And
swan song, maybe.
It may be, and it could be a preview of Big East matchups to come if he does get the St. John's job, as has been rumored.
Right.
I like UConn. Now, they've had some ebbing and flowing during the course of the year, but to me, that's a very dangerous team because they've got a lot of athleticism. They've got some good size to go with it. I don't know if I always trust their decision-making with their guards, but that's a very dangerous team. So I'm going to pick UConn to actually come out of that half. And then dipping below, UCLA, if they were full strength, they'd be an obvious pick to win this region, but they're not. They were down 2 starters in the Pac-12 title game, one of which was their center, Bona. I'm not sure what the deal is with him. I got the sense they think he'll be back, but they're also down another starter who's a defensive player of the year in the Pac-12, and he's done. So it's hard for me to get very excited about UCLA. I honestly, a full-strength TCU, which I was mentioning in our conversation with Dom, that's a pretty interesting pick to go on a run. I think they'll take out either Arizona State or Nevada, and then that will set up a fascinating second-round game, likely with Gonzaga. Gonzaga's back to their old tricks this year. You remember during that run, 2 years ago, where people had to come around to the idea, hey, Gonzaga can actually play defense. Remember? That's gone.
Yeah.
We're the number 1 offense in the country, but they're in the hundreds, I think, defensively. So it's back to what they used to be. This Gonzaga team, they've obviously had teams in recent years where you could look past the long stretch of just WCC play and say, yeah, these guys will figure it out. They'll get back up to the requisite level when they have to. I don't have that faith in this team. And then the other half, as I said, UCLA's got enough to get past Asheville, but Boise State is a team that a lot of people are buying in on. I'm not sure that I am. And there's Northwestern. I mean,
Sweet 16, is that what you're saying?
I don't know if I'm ready to go there, but I'm ready to believe that they will make it ugly with UCLA.
Yeah. Could be a Big Ten match in the second round, UCLA Northwestern, right?
That's right. A classic Big Ten tilt. I'm going to pick TCU. So I'm going to pick an Elite 8 here.
TCU and a UConn, huh?
And UConn and I'm going to go with TCU. How about that?
Yep.
I'm going with a 6 seed.
Yeah.
I'm going with a 6 seed. Mike Miles, I think, is going to put him on his back when they need him to, and going to get Jamie Dixon to the promised land. His first Final Four. Remember all those years everybody talked about Pitt and they just could never get over the hump, never get through. Now he's going to get it done at his alma mater at TCU.
So I feel like every year, one of the 11 seeds in the play-in game really goes on a run. It doesn't
You're
happen
right
every
about
year,
that.
but it seems like most of the time it does. And so I tend to think it's going to be more in the last region, and I didn't even mention that too in the Midwest. I think Iowa State goes down to either Pitt or Mississippi State, but it doesn't probably matter because they'll probably lose to Xavier anyway.
Possible.
I don't. This Northwestern team, they're really. I don't like them, and so I'm inclined to pick Boise State, but then I don't know. I haven't seen Boise State play. I just. When Northwestern wins, and I never know how they've done it, but they manage to win a bunch of games. They've not been playing well recently.
Here's how they do it. They play great defense, and they turn a very rare trick in that they are able to generate opponent mistakes without ever being unsound. So when you can force turnovers and not gamble to do it, that's a real advantage. And that is what Northwestern has been this year. Offensively, look, we all know it's a complete crapshoot with that bunch. I mean, they could have a day where Chase Audige is a flamethrower and, he's hitting everything he puts up for 20 minutes and he could shoot them right in. And then we can have a day where he goes, 3 for 16.
Yep.
And you just don't know what you're going to get. But I really do think Northwestern defensively has enough to get past the first game. And then I think they've got enough to at least make it tough on UCLA. But I think UCLA probably gets past them. But then I like TCU over UCLA in a Sweet 16. Yeah.
I do like UConn in this region too, for I think the similar reasons you point out too. I think that they're I don't like going chalk because it doesn't tend to work that way. Although I feel like I usually pick the wrong chalk.
Yeah.
And I do not like Illinois in this first round. I just do not like the Underwood. It's funny. My friend who's a big Illini fan, he's like, well, he has the most Big Ten wins in the last 3 years.
What kind of stat is that?
I don't know. I mean, that's what he told me. And I'm like,
right. No, but this is what I'm talking about. This is a sign of a desperate, sad program. And I would love Illinois people to hear this. They're not going to, but they really do need to take a look at themselves. You can tell your friend this at least. That is such a sad statistic. Well, the most Big Ten wins over the last 3 years. Who cares? Talk to me about 20 years. Talk to me about a decade. Talk to me about the championships you've won. If you're saying to me, well, we've got the most Big Ten wins over the last 3 years, what you're saying is we haven't accomplished anything. That's what that screams. It screams insecurity. And that's how I read Brad Underwood. I know I've said this before.
No, I understand. Yeah.
He is an incredibly insecure coach. Everything he does and says screams it.
Yeah. And I guess the only counter to that I would just say is that for them, for where they've been in the wilderness, it's an easy justification for why they should be embracing Underwood because, they were in a bad place for a long time. So for them, it's a definite improvement, but I guess the question is, can you move to the next step? Right. I mean, that's
right.
Always,
and the next step is the one that matters. That's what I'm saying.
Right. I totally agree.
You can't. So anyway,
they won a Big Ten and a half, right? They probably should have won the one Michigan, but Michigan dodged a game. You could argue, that, right.
Great.
And they did have a championship. So they've done some things. We'll see how they feel about things in 2 years. Right. That's really but this is
it. So they've gotten to here. They have those 2 years where they had relative success, but couldn't translate into anything in the postseason. And now they come into this thing a 9 seed. And while I do think they've got enough that if you told me, hey, they're going to beat Arkansas and then they beat Kansas, would it shock me? No, I could see a world in which that happens, but you certainly don't expect it. I don't think anybody's expecting it. So where are you?
Yeah.
Right. Where are you as a program? I just, in any event, to go back to UConn for a second, I think that the reason they're a good choice is their ceiling, in my opinion, is probably about as good as anybody's. It's not clearly better than everybody's, but it matches up with the highest ceilings. I mean, Alabama, Houston, whoever you want to talk about. I do believe that about UConn. That the one problem UConn's got is that Danny Hurley coaches them. and that might sound funny, but what I mean by that is Danny Hurley has shown a nagging tendency to lose his at exactly the worst possible moments. And he has not yet even remotely seen the kind of pressure cooker that a Sweet 16, Elite Eight kind of game is going to bring to the table. And so that would be my one hesitation. And that's why I'm picking TCU rather than UConn.
All right. I'm going Northwestern then. I guess I'm convinced. All right. So let's go to the East. And this is obviously Michigan State's region. It's got a couple of Big Ten teams beside it. So number one seed, of course, is Purdue. Then you've got them playing in the 8-9 team is Memphis and FAU. Number 6, they got Duke playing Oral Roberts. There's Tennessee playing Louisiana as a 4-13 matchup. 6 and 11 is Kentucky and Providence. And you've got Kansas State, Montana State as a 3-14. Michigan State and then Big Ten
rival,
USC. Yeah, rival. 7-10 is USC. And then the bottom bracket is Marquette and Vermont. Before we go into this, since I actually went to some trouble, I was doing some research and stuff. Because I think people are looking at Michigan State as a 7 seed here, and I think that's where Dom thought we were pretty confident that's where they're going to end up, and that's where they did end up. And I think it's actually a favorable matchup for a 10 of all the 10s they could have gotten. I think it's a pretty good one. But, so looking at, I think when people look at the seeding and they get thrown off a little bit by what's possible, what's not possible, right? Like everyone's like, oh, you got to avoid the 8-9 because you want to avoid the number 1 seed. Well, again, at some point you have to play number 1 seed. If your goal is to the Final Four, you most likely have to play a 1 seed, or you're playing a 2. Now, maybe those can both get taken out as you're some other seed in between and don't have to end up facing them. But looking at Michigan State's history, 3 of the Final Fours they were number 1 seed. 2 of the Final Fours they were a 2 seed. They were a 5 seed twice, and they were a 7 seed once. They were an Elite 8 seed for. They made the Elite 8 once where they've lost as a 4 seed. They lost in Sweet 16 as a 4 seed. They've lost in the Sweet 16 as a 1 seed. They've lost in the round of 64 as the only time they were when they were a 2 seed. That's of course the Middle Tennessee State disaster. When they were a 3 seed, they lost in the Sweet 16 and the round of 32. They lost in, and this is all just during Izzo's era, just by the way.
Right.
This is not the entire history. And then they've lost as a 4 seed in the Sweet 16. When they've lost in the first round, it's generally been once is a 3. Once is a 2, once is a 5, once is a 7, once is a 9, twice is a 10, and once as an 11, that play-in game, which, it's actually amazing how long it takes you to do this because you have to get 25. It's a lot of data.
It's a lot of data.
And then the other thing, too, I think that throws you off is that you look at, how are they playing up to the last, before they go to the NCAA tournament? And that, of course, is your Big Ten tournament, generally speaking, right? So they won it all in 2000. They won the Big Ten championship tournament, and they won the NCAA championship. They went to Final Four in 99, won Big Ten championship. The year after that, in 2001, they lost the first round. They didn't win any games, and they still made the Final Four. They made the Final Four in 2009, where they only won the first game in the Big Ten tournament. In 2019, they won the whole thing. And they made the Final Four in 2005. They didn't win a single Big Ten game. In 2010, they didn't win a single Big Ten tournament game. And then in 2015, they lost to Wisconsin. That's when they made the Final Four, and they made the finals there. So I guess the point is there's no pattern to it. Whether you do well in the Big Ten tournament or you don't, it's kind of random. And then the other thing too is you look at the seeding for the Final Four just in general, and this is, I think everyone knows this, but just look at the last 10 years. You have the 1 seed is in it. There's a 1-2-2-4, 1-4-4-9, 1-2-7-8, 1-1-1-7. That was in 2015. That was a strange year. And then 1-2-2-10.
The 7 was Michigan State, by the way.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And then 1-1-3-7, 1-1-3-11, 1-2-3-5, 1-1-2-11, 1-2-2-8. And of course, that 8 was North Carolina last year, who was this year's preseason number 1 and didn't make the tournament. But it just shows you can kind of come from anywhere. It doesn't mean that Michigan State's going to make it. I don't want to give that impression because I don't personally think that they have not shown the consistency, and I think as you mentioned, the versatility, the different ways of winning, that I feel that they probably need to make a really long run. But, I've been fooled before. I'm not going to say that I know obviously can't know the future. But so let's just go into and just, go wherever you want to go with that. Here's
the thing. Some of those years you're talking about, like, for example, 2015, when Michigan State was a 7 seed, got to the Final Four. You could, if you were paying attention, you could see that team coming.
Sure. Right.
Okay. They got to the Big Ten tournament final and they were playing well down the stretch of the regular season. I don't think anybody was confidently predicting a Final Four, but you could see that team coming. That team had started to gel. The 2005 team was a 5 seed, I think. That was the most egregious underseeding I've ever seen of a Michigan State team. That team was positively loaded. They got hurt because the Big Ten that year was awful outside of the top 3. You had Illinois, who went all the way to the national title game. You had a very good Wisconsin team that went to the Elite Eight. And you had Michigan State as an Elite Eight team. Or as a Final Four team, I'm sorry.
Yeah, right. Yeah, Elite Eight too. Yeah.
Everybody else, I can't even remember if anybody else from the league made the field. If they did, they didn't do anything. So Michigan State had a really good, in many ways, regular season. They just couldn't beat Illinois. And as it turns out, only North Carolina could beat Illinois. But that team was absolutely loaded. I mean, looking at that as a 5 seed, it's a joke when you look at the talent on that roster. And actually what they did, the way they played. So some of those years that Michigan State's done it as an underseeded team, I think we have to be careful to extrapolate too much, saying, well, they were 7-15, they're 7 this year. I felt very differently about that team in 15. If Michigan State had gone on a run in the Big Ten tournament and regardless of winning or losing, had played extremely well, I would be more likely to buy into that. But they haven't shown that. They haven't shown that consistency like everybody else. The upsides are this. As Dom said, and I totally agree with him, the 1, 2, 3, and 4 in this bracket are not good. They are the worst of that seed line, in my opinion, in all 4 instances. Whereas I think he's right. At least on the merits, the 5, 6, 7, 8 are the best. Those Michigan State was actually the second highest 7 seed, but you get the point. Michigan State's particular draw, USC, and we're going to go into this more tomorrow in our preview issue, but USC is certainly a capable team. They're absolutely capable of beating Michigan State, but that's not a bad draw. It really isn't. If you look at the other 10s, they weren't going to play Penn State because of the way this thing's set up, but Penn State would terrify me. Boise State, and the other 10 is Utah State. I guess I would be inclined to put USC in the middle of that. But they're not a 10 seed that, like, oh my God, I don't know how we're going to compete with them. And then you look at Marquette as a 2 seed, man. I just think, and the standard issue prediction, virtually I think it was everybody I saw on the ESPN show had it Duke versus Marquette in the Elite Eight game. So immediately take those 2 teams out. But honestly, I mean, does Marquette scare you? Of course, Michigan State could lose to them, but do they scare you? No.
They scared a lot of people on the Spartan Mag board.
Yeah.
A lot of people think, oh my God, these guys are world beaters.
Yeah, no, they're not. And then Vermont, whatever. But here's the other thing. There's 2 things. One doesn't mean very much. The other might mean a lot. The thing that doesn't mean very much is Tom Izzo in this 4-team little pod has played all 3 of these other teams in the NCAA tournament before. He's played them each once. You know what his record is?
Well, I know he's beaten USC and Vermont.
And Marquette, 3-0.
Marquette. Was that with Tom Crean?
That was, yes, yes, I believe it was. Yeah. It was Drew Neitzel's junior year where they had to kind of battle to get into the tournament, and then they took out Marquette and lost in the second round, I believe, to North Carolina. So he's 3-0 in the tournament against this group. Does it mean anything? Probably not, but I just think it's interesting information for people to think about. I will say, I want to say USC was, God, what were they that year in 2009? They were maybe the most grossly underseeded team I've ever seen, because I want to say they might have even been a double-digit seed. They might have been like an 11 or something.
Yeah, I think you're right.
And that team had at least two
battle.
NBA players on it. They had Taj Gibson and they had DeRozan. And they might have had more. I might be forgetting somebody. That team was crazy good. And Michigan State, that was the best team Michigan State played in that regional, in my opinion. They were better than Kansas. But anyway, so 3-0 against this group in the tournament. And remember, they played Vermont the year that Vermont upset Syracuse in 2005. Now that I'm thinking about it, and this is interesting too, the wins over Vermont and USC each came in years where Michigan State went to the Final Four. The Marquette win, it was 2-0. So again, just probably not very important food for thought. What might matter a lot is that these games are in Columbus. It's going to be
strange.
It's going to be a Michigan State crowd. I think it will be a largely Michigan State crowd. And if I'm Shaka Smart, I'm really not happy about that, because Michigan State will fill that place. I'm sure Marquette will get a lot of people driving down from Milwaukee, and they'll have a good crowd. But I'd be shocked if they could compete with what Michigan State can bring if those two teams get to a second round game. For sure, USC is going to be in a road environment. I don't think there's any doubt about that. For this team to essentially have not a home court game, but a very friendly draw when it comes to location is not something you necessarily saw coming before the bracket came out. So that might mean something, it might not. But anyway, that's Michigan State. We'll get into a lot more depth about Michigan State tomorrow. Just looking at this bracket, we've talked all year long about Purdue. And I mean, nothing I saw in the Big Ten tournament. They won it. I mean, congratulations. But they barely held off Penn State. Penn State was running on fumes, fourth game in 4 days, and they still made it a one-possession game. I don't know. You saw the game today. Do you have any faith in Purdue's guards at this point?
I was talking to my wife, and my kids is relieving the arena. Like, as soon as now I could realize this end of the game situation is different a little bit, but teams that would press Purdue's guards really cause all kinds of disruption. Yep. I mean, those guys they just can't handle it. And they can't handle when you're in them. And that's where I think Rutgers, if Rutgers had some sort of ability to score anywhere, they could have beaten Purdue. But because it's really amazing how much, I don't want to say regression, but how much more exposed Fletcher Lawyer seems now than he did beginning of the season. Because Braden Smith, same thing. I think he struggles a little bit more, but not quite as much. Fletcher Lawyer really has a lot of problems when you sort of are physical with him. He really, really has. I mean, he had to keep getting taken out of the game.
Right. Exactly.
But I would say in defense of Purdue, is Daniels? Is that his name? Number 14. That's his last name. I'm trying to remember. McDaniel, or I can't remember his name now.
You're talking about David Jenkins?
Jenkins. Yeah. Jenkins. He was really good. I mean, he shot really well in this tournament. He's the reason they actually advanced, because he was hitting threes when no one could hit anything for the most part. And
right.
He was a much better guard for them.
I think that's right. But I guess the way I look at it is, if you're relying on David Jenkins and Ethan Morton to get you to a Final Four.
Yeah, no, I agree. They're not going to make it.
It isn't happening.
Yeah.
And I also agree. It's clear that the book is now out on Purdue. The question is, does anybody in this half of the bracket have what it takes to exploit that? And there are some interesting, the most obvious one is Memphis in that 8-9 game. I don't know that I believe Florida Atlantic can do that, even though they're a very good team. I just don't think they're built that way. But Memphis, I watched I didn't watch the Big Ten title game today. I've seen enough Big Ten basketball playing each other. I mean, and plus it's, come on, fourth game in 4 days for Penn State. It's a farce. But I watched the title game of the American, and it's the first time I've seen Memphis in a while since the preseason. And, they're not the smartest team. but what they are is very athletic. and they play very hard. And I think they are capable, if they get to a matchup against Purdue, of getting into Purdue's guards. And if they can do that, they can make life very tough on them. Now, Duke absolutely can play that way with their guards. They are a very good defensive team. I think Duke's losing to Oral Roberts, though. So, but if I'm wrong about that, Duke is a team that could get Purdue. And then there's Tennessee. And, Tennessee, our conversation with
point
Tom,
guard, everyone talks about.
Yeah, Ziegler is out. But you know what? If Tennessee can somehow get through, Tennessee also has that capability. They are a very good defensive team. They can play very aggressively. So there are a lot of teams in that half of the bracket that theoretically could do that to Purdue. So what's going to be critical for Purdue is that the bracket breaks the right way and that they don't end up having to play these teams. Because, I really like Oral Roberts. I think Oral Roberts is a fun team to watch, and they've got some real players. They might be better than they were 2 years ago when they made their run. But I'm not sure that stylistically, I believe they've got what it takes to do to Purdue what you need to do. I might be wrong about that, but that's my early read at least.
And I don't know. They're the one you said has a 7'9" player.
He's 7'5". I'm exaggerating slightly.
7'5".
Connor Vanover. He started his career out at Arkansas.
So he's taller than Edey.
Transferred. Yeah. Now the problem is he's also reed thin. He's really a perimeter guy as much as anything else on offense. But you're right.
Okay.
They do have that, and so I'd be worried about him playing one-on-one and foul trouble because Edey, I think, could go through him. But at least in terms of length, he's long enough. But again, I think people get caught up in Edey, and that's not where it's at. It's you got to deal with their guards. You got to make their guards beat you, and get into them, and make it tough for them to even get into their offense. So that half is interesting. I don't really like any of them. I mean, because I just don't. But that's how I feel about this whole field. But I just do not have any faith in Duke. I think the 9 wins in a row is a kiss of death. I don't think they're that good anyway. I think again, it's ACC. People have made more of it than is really there. I'm not a believer in Duke.
So you're picking Oral Roberts to come out into Elite Eight? Is that what you're saying?
No, that's the thing. I'm looking at this half and I can't pick anybody.
Someone has to.
God,
I've heard.
You know what? I'm gonna pick a massive upset. I'm gonna pick Tennessee. Everybody slagging them. They're left for dead in a heap in the corner. Yeah. I'm gonna pick Tennessee to somehow pull it off. But boy, I don't feel confident about any of it.
I thought for sure you're gonna pick Purdue, but then say that you didn't think it would be them.
Well, okay, fair. That is kind of what I believe. Yeah,
like Indiana, like they're going to win Big Ten, but it won't be them.
Somebody will get them. I'm just not sure who it is. Yeah, that is how I feel. And in the bottom half, without getting into the Michigan State portion, we'll just do the top two. Kentucky is a 6 seed, and I understand Dom saying, well, they're a really good 6 seed because on paper, the talent level, or at least the purported talent level, would suggest that they are, in fact, underseeded. But we all know they've had a terrible year relative to expectations. I mean, and I'm first in line.
Of late, they've been playing better. Yeah.
Yeah, they have. But then they got beat by Vanderbilt, who's not in the field.
Twice.
Yeah. So how good have they really changed anything up? I can't remember who it was, one of these damn shows this evening. I can't keep them straight now. Somebody claimed that the SEC was right there with the Big 12 as the best conference in America. On what planet?
Yep, I heard them say that too.
On what planet? Yeah. At the top end, there's a couple of good teams, but there's Alabama. I don't know if there's anybody else. I'd have to think about it.
So Rod, do you want the story on that comment?
Yeah.
So that was on ESPN's show.
Yeah.
And you know who ESPN's going to be covering games for now?
Yes.
Big 12 and SEC.
It just means more. Well, I've got a response to that. Not in basketball, it doesn't. Yeah. Look, I'm right there with everybody else that got bamboozled by Kentucky. I said when Michigan State was preparing to play them, I thought they were the best team in the country, bar none. And they have been nowhere remotely close to that at any point this season. So, yeah, I get it. Anytime you've got some of the horsepower, or again, perceived horsepower they've got on that roster, you're inclined to say, boy, can that Kentucky team at a 6, that's undervalued. That's a great play. But they've been so inconsistent that I don't know how you can have any confidence in them. They're playing a Providence team that was playing great basketball at one point in the season, and for them to slide all the way to an 11, so they almost slid out of the field.
Yeah.
But again, in this season, maybe Providence ready to go on a heater. And then the other game, Kansas State, Montana State. I mean, Kansas State is going to win that game, I suspect. But they're another team I've seen play a few times. Full credit to Jerome Tang, his first year in the head job down there. They were picked last in the league. They finished 3rd. They get a 3 seed in the tournament. They've had a very good year. Great. That's not a smart basketball team. That is not a smart basketball team. I saw them play a game against Kansas where they somehow won after doing just about everything humanly possible to give it away in a game where they were in control. And that was not a unique situation. I saw them play that way a few times. They've got a team with a great motor. They play incredibly hard. They're tough. They're athletic. They got a lot of things to like, but 10-cent heads. And so I think they get past that first one. And that's the thing. I mean, as much as I'm saying, oh, Kentucky, I don't know, I'm inclined to put Kentucky in the Sweet 16. So who the hell knows? I'm not going to I'll make a pick. It's not going to be Michigan State. I have to maintain some shred of credibility, and I would love to be wrong, but I can't pick Michigan State to win it. But I do think Michigan State can make a run. I'm gonna take a flyer. I'm gonna guess I might be the only person outside of Knoxville, Tennessee, to make this pick. I'm gonna pick the battered and bruised Tennessee Volunteers to come through a region that I believe is completely wide open, just because I hate every one of these bigger name teams.
Yeah,
and just don't have any faith in them. And that, by the way, that would include Marquette, because I have no faith. I have zero faith in Marquette. I have zero faith in Shaka Smart.
Well, and I'm going to go with Duke and Kentucky, and I'll have Kentucky come out of the region.
You're picking Kentucky. All right.
I am. I mean, not because I like them, but I think just that I tend to pick teams that I dislike the most, and they seem to win the most, because I probably just tend to dislike the favorites after a while. And Kentucky, Duke. At least the nice thing is that we can only get one of those teams in the Final Four, so that's some advantage. And there's not no
God, what a
nightmare!
Up, so. A year where both Kentucky and Duke were very average, and you got them in the Elite Eight playing each other. Ugh. Yeah. It could happen. I mean, it certainly wouldn't be a shocker. And I'll say this, just one more quick thought about Purdue. The Purdue fan base, I think a lot of us know, is not engaged with reality very well at times, in terms of how they feel about Michigan State, how they feel about Tom Izzo. I think probably at least some of our listeners are aware of that. And they seem to have, and this makes some sense. It's the same as Michigan State fans often feel about Michigan. There's a chip on the shoulder. I think Purdue fans feel that IU gets a lot of breaks in the state, blah, blah, blah. So there's a chip on the shoulder mentality. And in fairness to them, they have had unbelievable success across the history of their program in the regular season.
Yep.
What they've never been able to do is have that breakthrough.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. There has never been a year where they've been handed a better opportunity than this one. Even with a team they've got that's as flawed as it is, You look at this region, and if you're Purdue and you don't get it done for this year, you got no room to complain about anything else ever. Draws, where you're seated, none of it. It is screamingly obvious that there is an opportunity as good as you could reasonably ask for to come through a region and get to a Final Four for the first time in a generation.
Well, and if I can leave on a bright note, 2 more years of Zach Edey. All right, so let's go and finish up here. Actually, my wife's like, "What? That's not possible." I said, "Oh yeah, it's possible." I don't know
possible,
what else he's gonna
unlikely.
do.
I'm gonna take another flyer, maybe not quite equal to my Tennessee flyer. I'm gonna guess that Zach Edey is done in college because I think he's going to get drafted. Well, no, he's going to get drafted. I think he'll be a second-round pick, and I think he'll go. I think he is done, but we'll see.
All right, let's get out of here. Just before we go, I just want to remind you to visit our other sponsor. A great way to support the show is Nudge Printing. Nudge Printing has been instrumental in getting the Spartan Strong going. They've printed over 15,000 shirts. They help with the design, I think, a little bit. They've helped raise money for the shooting victims at Michigan State. Also, Gabe and his team are working on helping out Maddie Sissoko in his foundation, which helps his village back in Mali. Listen to the show, as you know, guys helped raise over $25,000 and to get that school. It's already under construction back in Mali, which is going to help those kids a ton. They're going to be walking less than they were walking an hour and a half, I think he said, each way to get to school. Some of them, so now they'll be able to spend a lot more time helping their family and not they'll be able to go to school and get educated and probably change a lot of lives. And so, thanks to all of you. And to Gabe and his team for helping Mahdi's foundation get going as well. You can get other great gear there as well. Obviously, Spartan stuff, vintage decals, wall stickers, cornhole stickers, stuff for your tailgating. Super comfortable. I'm wearing one right now. I've got our logoed sweatshirt, soft and comfortable. I won my free throw competition because, despite Michigan State, our predictions, I know one person who's going to the Final Four, and that's me. So I will be at the Final Four. It is on my schedule in Houston, which now my wife's like, "Hey, the women's Final Four is in Dallas." so it's actually the offset days of the men's Final Four. And she's like, "Well, if I was playing, we got to go see Caitlin Clark." And I don't know if you've ever watched Caitlin Clark play, but she is actually really entertaining. She's like insane, where she's shooting from like NBA distance threes and stuff like that. She's really
she's kind of
fun to watch.
Kind of the Steph Curry of women's basketball. Yeah.
Right. She really is. She is a lot of fun to watch. And I don't really generally like watching women's basketball, but it's actually kind of fun watching that. And my wife's obviously an Iowa fan. So who knows? We'll see what happens as far as Iowa goes and how far they make it in the tournament as well. So I think we'll get out of here, and we'll be back with our breakdown of the Michigan State's first round matchup against Big Ten foe, the USC Trojans. And we'll be back in just a little bit. See you then. And until next time, the Final Four is on the schedule. Go.
March Madness is here, and the Sports Gambling Podcast has you covered. We've got daily shows from Las Vegas where we're picking every game against the spread, helping you dominate your bracket. Plus, we got our free March Madness bankroll contest where you can win $1,000 in cash and prizes. Best part is all of our picks and contests are completely free. So subscribe to the Sports Gambling Podcast, and don't forget to let it ride.